So welcome back everyone to the Athlete Climate Academy. Today in the Academy we've got the lovely Imogen Napper. And Imogen, what is it that you do?
So I'm a postdoctoral researcher, marine scientist, looking at the sources and fate of plastic in our marine environment.
And I first came across you a while back. You were kind of like heading the charge from what I could see in microfibres and your work down on the south coast, which was all about washing machines at the time, right? I think I saw just so many pictures of you surrounded by a plethora of washing machines.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time next to washing machines, doing a lot of washing, and my first research piece looking at washing our clothes kind of built the way for it. And so what always surprises me is that our clothes can be made out of plastic, because when I think of plastic, I traditionally think of something that's really hard or something that's a common item like a plastic bag or a water bottle. So knowing that the clothes that we can wear are plastic is just surprising. But the t-shirt I'm wearing right now is plastic to prove a point. It's polyester. And when they're swishing and swirling around in the washing machine, tiny fibres can come off our plastic clothes and go down the drain, potentially through our sewage treatment works and then into our ocean. And we did some research that showed basically 700,000 fibres can come off our clothes per wash, which is a substantial amount.
And it's one of those things that when you say it out loud, there's so many things in science where we get these pieces of research and you go, oh yeah, of course that happens. Like it seems obvious, but only because now we know what's happening.
Yeah, it's just like, oh gosh, yeah. Well, clothes are made out of plastic. I've always known that we have like polyester jumpers or t-shirts. But when you actually think of it and when you're washing it, it's like, that's actually really obvious. I just didn't ever put two and two together.
So I always like to take things right back to the start and think about, okay, so there's plastic coming off our clothes, into the waterways, down into the sewers and down into the oceans. Is plastic in the ocean bad? And if so, why? So I suppose to answer that question, we have to answer what is plastic and why is plastic something that we shouldn't be getting into the natural environment? So what is plastic?
So plastic is actually an extremely simple material, and it's really revolutionized our lives in the last 100 years. And it comes from crude oil. If you think of carbon and hydrogen, put them in a long line to make a polymer, that's basically what a plastic is. And there's lots of different variations depending on what plastic type, say polyester, acrylic, polyethylene, etc. Plastic
Lycra, my favorite.
Yeah, Lycra, exactly. And 100 years ago, around then, the first synthetic plastic was called Bakelite. And it was the first man-made plastic. And the person who invented it, the logo that went with it was an infinity symbol because they could see how many products it could make. So plastic's actually an incredible material. I originally started my PhD thinking it was evil, it was the devil, and actually I was completely wrong. It's a fantastic material, but it's what we do with it that's the issue, because it's so durable and it's so persistent. And because we make so much of it in single-use applications, or so much of it can break away even from clothing and end up in an environment, it's just making, for example, our oceans into a big plastic soup where we can't remove this plastic because it's either too small or it's in such quantities. How do you remove something that's that troublesome?
I start a lot of my talks with how much I think plastic is a wonderful, wonderful material. And you're right, it has revolutionized the world in a way that you cannot walk into a room without something being made of plastic anymore. You cannot go 30 seconds into your day without coming across something that's made of plastic. And it's really great. And if you want to make something that lasts almost forever, and you've made this product that you want it to last a long time, you want it to be durable, you want to be able to mold it in different ways, then plastic is the thing to make it from. The problem then becomes that a lot of the plastics that we create, or the products that we create, aren't designed to last forever, but we still make them from this material that's designed to last forever.
So even carrier bags, and it seems pretty wild that a few years ago a majority of the time we would go shopping, every time we would just get new carrier bags. But my mum still has carrier bags from when I was in primary school, and they're still functioning. They're absolutely fine. And it just links back that plastic is wonderful, but we need to stop making so much of it for applications that aren't needed, and think about all of the different ways it can end up into our environment. One of them being wearing and washing clothes, which is really surprising.
So clothes now made from, a multitude of different things, including a multitude of different plastics. So the when you put them in the washing machine, well, I suppose before you put them in the washing machine, just all the time they shed bits of that plastic. But it happens especially when you put it in the washing machine because they get battered around a lot. It gives off microfibres. What constitutes a microfibre?
So a microfibre, and I'm trying to explain this, exactly what you think it is. It's going to be a tiny, long piece of plastic. And because it's micro, it's going to be less than 5 millimeters in length and very thin. And if you're thinking about dust, it's basically going to be a lot of dead skin cells and microfibres from our clothing. But the problem is that these microfibres that are made out of plastic, that are potentially coming off our clothes when we wash them, potentially going through the sewage treatment works and then into our oceans, they behave like a normal plastic because they are a normal plastic and could potentially persist in the environment for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
You did a bit of research. I think you did a bit of research. I was aware of, at the time, especially in the UK, that there was a lot going on around banning of microbeads in face wash. And but obviously they are beads, but they're micro. Are microplastics, is it like when all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs? Are all microfibers microplastics, but not all microplastics microfibers?
Yeah, I think I get what you mean. So microplastics are defined as being less than 5 millimeters in length. And then within that, you can get different sizes. So microbeads are a term that were purposely used for tiny microplastics that were in facial scrubs. So they were more spherical in shape. Microfibers are longer, kind of elongated rectangles, you could say. You've got fragments that are jiggity-jaggedy in shape. So there's this whole classification of different shapes and sizes of microplastics, just as we're starting to learn how impactful they are in our environment.
And in the outdoor industry, I'm a bit of I've even got a show called Gear Geeks because I am very much a gear geek. I love outdoor gear and I love the practicality of it and the way that it can protect you from the elements. Obviously, this whole industry is going to be heavily reliant on plastics. Not only the clothing that we use, but the footwear that we use as well. The coats and everything. So in this industry, across all kind of fashion, I suppose, as well, what's the big drivers of plastic going into the environment? Is it through the washing? You've just done a bit of research on your Everest paper as well. What's the big drivers of us getting plastic into the environment?
So there's so many different varieties of ways, and that's why it makes solutions to plastic quite complicated. So we've shown that washing our clothes can be a large source of plastics potentially going into the environment, even wearing our clothes. And I think the Everest paper shows that quite well. So we took snow samples from Mount Everest, and truth be told, the closest that I got was actually my lab in Plymouth. It was a National Geographic expedition team that went out. But still, getting the samples from Mount Everest was still very exciting. And I actually use one of the sample bottles as a water bottle at the moment. Okay. And they went out to Mount Everest from Everest Base Camp all the way near to the summit in a place called Mount Everest Balcony and took snow samples all the way up. And we found microfibres, microplastic fibres in every single snow sample. And it correlated to where people were or where they were going. So in Everest Base Camp, there was about 70 microplastic fibres per litre of snow. But even towards the balcony, there was 10 microplastics per litre of snow. We started to see trends where the climbing path was, we'd see more plastic. But as we got further away from the climbing path, there'd be less. So it's almost like wherever we go, we're leaving a trail of breadcrumbs of plastic from our clothing.
And again, one of those things that when you see the research and when you see the conclusion, you're like, oh yeah, that seems to make sense. And as a scientist, you couldn't really ask for a more straightforward, oh, there's people here, they're wearing clothes and have other bits of equipment that are made of plastic, including shoes, including tents, including all this stuff. And the further away you get from people, the less plastic there is. That's kind of an obvious outcome, or a really great conclusion to that research.
And it's scary because Mount Everest is somewhere that I've always considered to be very remote and very pristine. So knowing that researchers have found microplastics at the depth of the ocean, and now we're finding it nearly at the summit of Mount Everest, it makes you wonder, where's pristine anymore? But it also provides us with this amazing opportunity that we know we're polluting the environment. So let's look at different solutions. Let's work with industry and work together about how we can make this better.
And I'm a big advocate for not playing the blame game in this. You can point to people, you can point different directions and be like, these people are emitters of plastic and these people are consumers of plastic, and is everything in between. I'm quite a fan of not victim blaming people as well.
Yeah.
At the bottom end, when there's big emitters of plastic, asking people to stop using plastic in the way that is convenient for them is difficult. Which is why I still wear clothing that's made of plastic. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
And we still have to wash our clothes. So what are the steps that we can start to put in place to start making these baby steps towards changing the way that we approach plastic?
I completely agree with you. And I was literally, before this video session, I was talking to a friend about how it's turned into a very finger pointy culture. And actually, if we stop finger pointing and discuss and educate and handhold, we'll see so many more positive changes, because it can become a society where finger pointing just means that people don't want to speak out. So what we need to do is we need to all work together. And the microbead paper that we had explains it really well, where we found 3 million tiny plastic particles these microbeads could be in facial scrubs. Not good. And we know that there's natural alternatives instead, such as sugar and salt. So for consumers, when they were going to the supermarket or a shop and they were looking at what facial scrub to get, they would look in the ingredients list. If it said polyethylene, they wouldn't buy it and they would get a natural alternative instead. Then industry started to listen, because consumers have a really powerful voice and opinion, and they started to voluntarily remove microbeads from the products. And then because of this, then also government started to listen, and they made legislation banning microbeads in products. So it's almost like a trickle reaction, but all of it's linked.
It is. So what are, if any, and I find this really difficult, I think about it a lot, the alternatives to us making clothes, shoes, and everything else? What are the alternatives for us that would be the salt and the sugar version of the microbeads?
Yeah, but also salt and the sugar version. So there's lots of different.
I suppose if you knew the answer to this question, you would be a million billion.
And I'll tell it to you. So
Yeah.
the wonderful thing is there's so many different options that we have that can still have an impact. So the first is potentially looking at natural clothing. The caveat with this is it also has its own environmental pressures. So cotton clothes uses a lot of water. So where plastic comes in is actually it is a benefit. It's really durable. You could have a jacket that could last for years and years. And if there's an opportunity that industry can patch it up, or if you can fix it, then who's to say that jacket can't keep going for a further few years? But we always need to look at the environmental impact of other materials. The next one, if we're looking at washing our clothes, is something else that we did some research on, looking at filters that could go into washing machines to capture the fibres. We found that some inventions were over 80% effective at capturing the fibres before they go into the wastewater, which is awesome. It's a solution that is ready to go, and France, I believe in 2025, has made legislation that all new washing machines are going to have filters in. And we're in discussions about whether that's going to happen in the UK as well. But it could be the future of washing our clothes, so watch this space. But that still means that fibres are going to come off clothes when they're washed. And what do you do with the fluff that you collect? Unfortunately, at this moment of time, the most logical method is just putting it in the bin. So it goes in landfill and it's in a confined area. So then we can just start discussing with industry, how can we design clothes that are made out of plastics to shed less plastics in the first place? And it's a very new developing part of science, looking at different fabrics and different weaves, and some amazing material scientists that are way beyond my brain level are looking at this at the moment. But it's a very exciting sphere to be in.
So do you think that, in the fashion industry, the outdoor clothing industry, and all the rest, we are looking at the foreseeable future of our clothes being made of plastic?
Yeah, well, for the foreseeable future, definitely. And I still buy plastic clothes. They're extremely durable. And yeah, sometimes I need to fix them. We need to get away from this fast fashion culture where we just keep making quite cheap clothes that people will just buy cheaply, so they end up having a really full wardrobe and it's just more and more plastic, etc., etc. But if we can work with industry that we buy clothes that are extremely durable, they can shed less plastic, then that's exactly why plastic is there for. And you shouldn't feel guilty for buying plastic, but it's the questions that need to be asked of how can we make that plastic more efficient.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I keep bringing us back to the idea of reduce, reuse, recycle, because at the moment it does feel like, I live in Wales and we are so proud. I think we're like the second in the world after Germany, the best recyclers in the world. But I keep having to remind people that there's reduce and reuse above recycle, that they come first and then recycle comes later. So can we reduce the amount that we buy? I personally love outdoor clothing and I will put my money in spending more on it because it will last longer. And I feel like that's doing my bit. I feel like I didn't learn until I was in my mid-20s at least that if you buy cheap, you buy twice. And that's really bad. So putting that extra money in and getting something that will last. Can we reuse it then? Can we create ways of making it last longer, fixing it up, passing it on? I'm working on a project at the moment where we fix up outdoor clothing and pass it on to be reused by other people. And then recycle comes last, right? Like the thing is with recycling is that it's such a complicated process that, was it 9% of the world's of the plastics we've ever used has been recycled, because you can't make like for like. You can downcycle into other products. They're used now in the outdoor industry at the moment. You are right. It's a very, very complicated process, all of it.
Yeah, and someone described recycling to me, and it's never gone out of my head, that yes, you can recycle a product, and if I recycled a water bottle, then potentially it could be made into another water bottle. But the complexity comes in of, let's say that water bottle is the colour red, then we can't make it clear again, so it can only be red or dark colours in the future, which decreases its recycling value. And then, even if it was recycled, it could be recycled into a worse polymer that then can't be recycled again. So it's a circular loop, but for a limited time.
So yeah, it's really hot at the moment, this idea of circular economy, and it's something we should definitely be pushing for. Like, how do we make sure that the virgin plastics that we create then come back into the system again? And there's a couple of people in the outdoor industry, a couple of companies at the moment that are saying, Salomon, I think maybe this year, all time is blurred into one, but have a shoe that they're going to bring back in and then downcycle that into a ski boot.
Oh, cool.
Because you turn in that white shoe into then I assume a black ski boot, and they say you can send it straight back into Salomon. And I wonder if we should be asking more companies to, if you create something, put it out into the world. Soda companies making 3 billion plastic bottles a year, should they then be like, we've got to take that back? You should be able to send your products back into that company who made it in the first place.
I think that companies, industry who are making products or doing something that is going to have a wasteful output. You need to think of environmental matters straight from the get-go. So if you're making, for example, this pen I'm holding, how is that pen going to be disposed of? What's the environmental impact that this pen is going to have? So rather than thinking of it at the end when the problem's already happening, let's have these discussions early, because we'll see much more effective change.
And I think we're in that place now where companies are starting to realise that that's a decision they need to make early.
Yeah.
There's new right to repair things coming out that said, I think, I'm not sure which country it is, but they're saying that the right to repair has to be in all products, so that when you create a phone, for example, you should have the right to repair that phone and not just throw it straight in the bin. I know certain action cameras and certain phones that it's just so difficult to get into, and the materials in that, not just plastic but all the metals, they just go straight in the landfill, straight in the bin. So we are starting to see a change, I think, in the culture where we're saying, like you say, think about that up front before you make it, and make sure that we don't pollute. We talked about earlier on how the plastic problem seems to be dwarfed by the climate change problem. But 4%, I think it is, of crude oil each year goes into making plastics anyway. We incinerate a lot of our plastics. So it's all the same thing, right? It's all connected.
It's all connected. And if we can use it as a gateway to understand environmental matters in a better way, that's how it should be used.
Imogen, thank you so much for filling us in on what I imagine you've explained a million billion times, but you always do it in such a nice way. Imogen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.